Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 Ark creatures that have really annoying taming methods. But just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help the channel. In at number 10 is the Archaeopteryx. Now this thing definitely isn't really too much of an annoyance in terms of its taming method. It just spawns in a really annoying area, and also this thing just has a very weird taming food as well. You literally have to feed this thing chitin. This thing, in my opinion, just has a really annoying taming method, as somehow whenever I'm taming one of these things, for whatever reason I actually tame one of these things, I always end up messing it up miserably. And also, once you have got this thing tamed, it isn't really even worth having one, because the glide suit exists now. Before the glide suit existed, this thing may have been very viable for you. But now the glide suit exists, these things really are not worth the tame, and for me, they are just really, really annoying. In at number 9 is the Basilosaurus. Now, in my opinion, this may not be the same for you, but I just really, really hate passive tames. Passive tames are literally the bane of my Ark playing. Especially around a Basilosaurus in the wild, you will find loads of mantas. And mantas are an absolute pain. The worst part of taming a Basilo is definitely luring all of those mantas away and finding a way to either lose them or dispose of them. And sometimes that just takes absolutely ages. And on top of all of that, the Basilosaurus tame does take a while on top of that as well. Passive tames are definitely not fast, and I would argue that a knockout tame is significantly faster than a passive tame. When you have tamed a Basilosaurus though, these things are incredibly useful, and I do think every Ark player at some point should tame themselves a Basilosaurus. These things are absolutely legendary. They are by far the best creature for doing underwater caves, as they are immune to electric eels and jellyfish, which is a godsend. In at number 8 is the Raasclark. Now for me, the Raasclark is a completely useless tame. I have absolutely no use for this tame at all, but if you play PvP on Ark, the Raasclark is a great shout and definitely a tame worth taming. But it is definitely an annoying tame which you really shouldn't underestimate. It is a passive tame as well, where you will feed this thing spoiled meat, you'll need bug repellent, and you'll need gilly. But the thing is, where Raasclark spawn, there are loads and loads of other hostile creatures. But I would say Raasclark is the go-to map for taming these things, as on the island, they only spawn in caves, and you really do not want to be taming one of these things in caves, as it is pretty much bound to go wrong unless you kill every other creature in the cave, which simply isn't viable. But in terms of the mantis' use in PvP, these things can destroy any type of structure. Yes, even tech. But the thing is about this creature, which makes it even better for PvP, it is small and easy to get around. In at number 7 is the Bloodstalker. This was definitely a much bigger issue in terms of taming back when Genesis Part 1 came out, but now that the Desmodus exists, blood packs are so much easier to obtain now, and the Bloodstalker tame isn't as annoying as it used to be. But if you are just playing on Genesis Part 1, the Bloodstalker can still be a very annoying tame, and a Desmodus isn't an easy tame in itself either, so it is definitely a task to get all of those blood bags, especially if you are taming a high level. It could even take thousands of blood bags if you're playing on official and you are trying to tame a max level 150. But once you have got a Bloodstalker tamed, these things are by far some of the best traveling creatures in Ark. Obviously, the Maywing is a lot better than the Bloodstalker for any kind of traveling, but the Bloodstalker is, in my opinion, a lot more satisfying to use than the Maywing, even though it does require a bit more skill to control, as the Maywing is actually quite simple in its controls. It still takes a while to learn, but if you compare the Bloodstalker to something like the gas bag, this thing is much much easier to control, and also Genesis Part 1 really rewards you for learning those skills, as there are many missions where you will need a Bloodstalker, and there are also Bloodstalker race missions on Genesis Part 1 as well. So if you want some quick, easy hexagons, then actually if you are good at flying a Bloodstalker, it might not actually be a bad shout to learn how to fly a Bloodstalker, and then you will be able to combat those missions really easily and get all of those necessary hexagons. In at number 6 is the Basilisk. Now I'm sure by now you know how the Basilisk is tamed, and it is definitely an annoying one which you should not underestimate. You will need eggs such as a Rock Drake egg, a Magmasaur egg, or I think Wyvern eggs work too. And essentially after you have those eggs, what you need to do is from a higher position where it is not aggro to you, you need to drop the eggs above it, and then it will keep eating those eggs, and then eventually at some point after many eggs that it is eaten, you will tame yourself a Basilisk. And this is definitely a tame worth taming. They are reasonably fast, they do insane amounts of damage, and I'm pretty sure their second attack even does torpor. And they are actually quite good base defense as well, as you can bury them into the ground and store items if you needed to do that, or for the unsuspecting PvP raider of your base, you can have one nicely positioned outside. In at number 5 is the Astrodelphis. This is definitely a new Arc creature in the grand scheme of things. Yes, it is 2 years old now, but I still classify it as a newer Arc creature, as it is not pre-extinction, I would say. Is kind of new Arc creature stage things. But either way, if you were wondering how to tame one of these things, the Astrodelphis on paper seems like a very simple tame. You simply pet it and then feed it element. That may seem like a really easy task, but trust me, the Astrodelphis is definitely not an easy task to tame at all. The element definitely does take a lot of time to gather. Not really on Genesis Part 2, but it will still be a bit of an inconvenience. But mainly that petting cycle and it running away and then you feeding it element can be really annoying, as the space biome on Gen 2 has many creatures like the Void Wyrms, which can really mess up your tame, and the Astrodelphis itself can just mess up the tame, as in some cases Astrodelphises may get too hostile and you'll just get knocked around, and they may bite you and attack you, especially when they come in packs. It can be really hard just to get near one, as like a Diplo would do, they just keep knocking you and kind of playing you around and stopping you from getting anywhere close to them. But once you have one tamed, they are absolutely insane. In at number 4 is the Golem. This thing has a very simple tame, again on paper, and its tame method is pretty much the same as the next creature on the list, except the next creature is a little bit harder to tame. The Rock Golem, simply put, you just have to shoot cannons right into this thing's face. And actually that is a little bit of an issue, as cannons aren't very easy to control on Arc, which makes it really annoying, and also a Rock Golem head is pretty small for a cannon to actually hit. It's like the Titanosaur tame. Yes, it may seem quite easy to just shoot a cannon directly into its face, but this is a moving target. Yes, you can trap it, but it will still move in some cases and attack and kind of move itself out of the way a bit. This is not as simple as it seems on paper. But once you do have one of these things tamed, they are insane creatures on Scorched Earth and any map, really. They are great PvP tames. Definitely a very valuable creature that deals a lot of damage. But just as a quick note, you also are not going to feed these things meat. Don't do it, feed them rocks. In at number 3 is the Astrocetus. This is tamed the exact same way as the Rock Golem is, and the way you do that is by shooting cannons directly into its face. Yes, a Astrocetus face is a lot bigger than a Rock Golem, but with the zero gravity where these things spawn on Genesis Part 1 and their general higher mobility than a Rock Golem and a different dimension you have to deal with, as you were taming these things in the air, they can definitely be a lot more difficult than a rock golem to tame. Unless obviously you have the tech hover skiff, then it may be a little bit easier for you. But these things, even when knocked out, are still a difficult tame on top of that as well. They take a lot of resources to tame, and they also take a lot of time and a lot of narcotics just to keep them asleep. Once tamed, you have yourself an absolute hunking beast of a PvP creature. In at number 2 is the Rhino-Ganatha. Actually, this is Ark's most recent addition to the game, and if you haven't heard of it before, essentially this thing is an insect that will spawn in any swamp biome on the island or on the Lost Island, and those locations are on screen currently. But you may think, well, surely it's not that bad to tame, right? It's just a simple knockout tame. But actually this thing has a very long and laborious taming method, and actually if you did want to check it out, I do have a full video guide on how to tame yourself a Rhino-Ganatha, so if you are struggling, I will link that in a card on the top of the screen right now. But as a quick summary, you are going to want to know how to tame yourself a Rhino-Ganatha. But before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about what makes this creature so great as a creature, and also personally why I think you should tame yourself a Rhino-Ganatha as soon as possible. The Rhino-Ganatha is an extremely great flyer and is extremely useful for you to tame. Also, it just deals an amazing amount of damage, and it really is a great companion in Ark. Also, if you were just looking at the actual video there, you would have seen a glance at the steps to tame a Rhino-Ganatha. You're going to need to find yourself a male Rhino-Ganatha, then you'll need to kill it and get its pheromone. Then you're going to need to find yourself a female Rhino-Ganatha, preferably net gun it or trap it in some kind of way, and get it to the lowest amount of health possible without killing it. Obviously this does really help if you do have awesome spyglass, but if you do not have access to mods, if you're on console, or if you just like to play vanilla, you can always use the magnifying glass. Then once that is done, feed the pheromone to your Bronto. Sorry, I didn't mention that you need yourself a Bronto. Then at some point when the Rhino-Ganatha is out of the net gun, it is going to impregnate your creature, and then from there you will need to go through the hunger timers, which will require all the resources which were on screen about a minute ago, and then you would have tamed yourself a Rhino-Ganatha. And finally, in at number 1 is the Armaga. These things are an absolutely annoying tame. Essentially what you need to do is hunt around with these creatures, and they will hunt with you. But the catch is you can only hunt hostile creatures to actually gain that taming effectiveness. And this can go wrong on so many levels, and it is such an annoying tame that it really just, there is no way to get around it. It is just so annoying. It takes so much time. It even took Raasclark, a reasonably good Ark player, 24 hours. Yes, a whole 24 hours just to tame one of these things. They are definitely insanely difficult to tame. Ark's 10 worst tames. In at number 10 is the Achatina. Now, for many people, this would be a useful creature, but in my case, I have absolutely no use for this creature at all. It is just a bit of a pain to tame. It is quite expensive to tame, and for me, for my necessary cementing paste, I will just go to things like beaver dams, and if I want organic polymer, I will just go over to Raasclark and kill something like the mantis. But if Achatina paste is important to you, then I guess they could have a use there. But for me, these creatures really do not have any use at all. In at number 9 is the Raasclark. Again, to many other players, this creature may have a significant use, mainly in a PvP scenario though. But the thing is, these things are insanely annoying to tame and very difficult to tame as well. But if you would be taming one, tame one on Raasclark, as taming one of these things on the island really is not worth the time and effort it will take. These things are a passive tame requiring you to feed them spoiled meat, and then you'll probably need a ghillie suit as well so they don't notice you, and bug repellent on top of that. And all of that really does stack up over time, as those are expensive resources to obtain. But in a PvP scenario, these things are definitely a must, as they can destroy any kind of structures, tech structures, thatch structures, wood, you name any structure, this thing can destroy it, which is actually really good considering this thing's size. It is a very small creature, so it is relatively easy to inconspicuously go and destroy the side of someone's base and quickly get a raid in. In at number 8 is the Compy. This creature, in my opinion, no one should have a use for. This creature is borderline completely useless and will only eat prime meat, and I think kibble as well to tame, but you cannot feed this thing raw meat. Also, the Compy's torpor drains faster than a giga. This thing's torpor drain is insane, so you'll be spending a lot of narcotics trying to tame one of these things, and again, they have no use, their health isn't great, their damage isn't great. Do not tame one of these things. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. These are frogs, if you didn't know. A lot of people do call them frogs as well. But in terms of their use, again, to some players, these are very valuable creatures, as they are great at gathering cementing paste from killing insects. But again, in my opinion, I really do not see a use in this, as beaver dams are by far the go-to place for getting cementing paste. These things just don't gather cementing paste in a timely fashion compared to gathering a beaver dam, where you can easily get upwards of 200, maybe even 500 cementing paste just from raiding one beaver dam. And on top of that, you're going to be getting rare mushrooms, rare flowers, wood, and even silica pearls sometimes, which are really valuable resources. And when you're farming with one of these things, you are only getting the cementing paste from insects, and it takes significantly longer than raiding beaver dams. In terms of a water creature though, some people may use them for that, as they actually aren't too bad at swimming, but in the early game I would rather use something like a Carbenemes, as they're just easier to tame, as these things spawn in the swamp. Or if I am actually committing to go to the swamp, I will just get myself a Baryonyx, as they are much more worth it. In at number 6 is the Chalicotherium. These things definitely do have a use to some players. I don't know why I keep saying that, but in terms of how I think about this thing, I have pretty much never used this creature, and when I have tamed one, I never actually find a real use for it, as there are just other creatures that just do a better job. But I was actually reasonably surprised about how much knockback this creature gives, so I guess that is a bonus. But overall, these things have a very expensive taming method, and they're also a bit of a weird tame as well. The way how you tame one of these things is you have to go and get a beer barrel, and then you have to make beer. I can't remember quite how you make that. I think it's like berries and thatch in a beer barrel. Either way, it takes a lot of time, and it actually is reasonably expensive when you add all of it up, and then you'll go behind it and just passive feed it beer, I think, because you're not going to be knocking this thing out. Yes, passive feed this thing beer, and then you'll have yourself one of these things. I think I throw poop as well, but when I was testing this thing for taming, I managed to throw some rocks with them, which definitely could be useful, and I could see a use in it. But just in my case, I don't have a use for the Chalicotherium at all. In terms of harvesting and gathering, there are just better creatures out there for me than this. In at number 5 is the Amargasaurus. Now, you probably know already why this creature is on the list. Its taming method is so annoying. It even took Raasclark 24 whole hours for him to tame one of these things, and in my opinion, they're not even really worth it anyway, as everything the Amarga can do, a Bronto or something like a Stego will do better, and in terms of damage, you can just get something like a Rex, a Giga, or a Carcharodontosaurus to do that bit for you, and it is going to do a much better job than this creature, and it will not literally give you nightmares from taming this thing, as this thing is almost the hardest tame in the game. I would argue the Femrit is a lot harder, but still, don't even bother with one of these. In at number 4 is the Angler. Again, you may have not heard of this creature, and actually for me, I only really gave this creature thought when I was watching Squid's Arc video from way back when he tamed himself an Angler. But after that video came out, I have not given the Angler any thought at all, and really, these things don't need to be in the game, and they probably won't even make it into the game of Arc 2, as a Megalodon will do better, a Baryonyx will do better, an Ichthyosaurus will do better, a Mosa will do better, a Plesio will do better. There just isn't a use for these things. A small agile creature in the ocean that can deal damage, you can just use a Barry for that. If you just need an agile creature, use the Ichthyosaurus, and if you want even more damage, use a Mosa, a Plesio, or a Megalodon. It is as simple as that. You do not need the Angler or the Manta for that matter in any instance in the ocean. I really do not find them useful. They could be alright for pearl gathering, but there are just much better creatures out there. In at number 3 is the Archaeopteryx. Now, these things overall do get a pretty bad rep, and I'm going to give them a bad rep in this video, as these are one of the most useless creatures in Ark by far. There is absolutely no use for these things in the game at all after the glide suit came out in Arboration. There just simply is not a point, as when you glide with these things, yes, they're going to glide effectively. You will have a positive 5-star gliding experience, but when you land, that's going to turn more into a 1-star experience, as you will not be able to wield weapons, and you'll be slowed down because you'll be carrying this creature around. Whereas the glide suit, yes, you'll be losing a bit of armor, but you can still walk at normal speed and get on with your day-to-day Ark tasks without being concerned about your glider. In at number 2 is the Aranio. The Aranio really could be an outstanding Ark creature, if it wasn't that this thing is absolutely rubbish and has no use. But if this thing did get a TLC in future, I could see how this would be a really great PvE and PvP Ark creature. If this had the ability to climb walls and shoot webs like the Bloodstalker to get around the map, then this thing would actually be a good tame. But in terms of taming spiders, just tame a Bloodstalker. These things are not worth it at all. They have 2 attacks, their web attack, their normal attack, and that is pretty much it. They barely even move quickly, their stamina is rubbish, their health is awful, and their taming method is just really annoying. But before we get into number 1, I want to quickly tell you that we have a channel membership here, and you could really help out the channel by subscribing. It is $4.99 a month. You will get access to member exclusive videos, early access to videos, you will get your own shoutouts, you'll get your own live chats, and also an extreme priority reply to comments. So if that all sounds good to you, then why not consider becoming a channel member? Your channel will be displayed on the front channel page as well. So why not give it a go and see how you like it, and if you don't like it, you can always cancel later. And without further ado, let's get into number 1. And in at number 1 is the Coelacanth. Obviously, this would make it on the list for just the worst Ark creature, as the Coelacanth has no use at all as a creature. It has no abilities, it can't attack, its health is pretty rubbish, and I don't even know why you could tame one of these things. And in this list, you could put any of the fish in Ark, such as piranhas and the saber-toothed salmon on top of that list as well. These really do not have a use at all. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you consider becoming a channel member, as it will really help us out. Comment your top 10 worst Ark creatures in the comments down below, and I will see you all later. Bye.